How do you win a war when the sky itself becomes a trap? On October 6, 1973, many families in Israel were observing Yom Kippur. It is the holiest day in Judaism. Most people were fasting and praying. The nation's guard was down. At exactly 2 p.m., that peace was shattered. In a coordinated surprise attack, Egypt crossed the Suez Canal in the south. At the same time, Syria attacked the Golan Heights in the north. The Yom Kippur War had begun. This story is not just about a past conflict. It is about a moment that changed military history forever. It showed how new technology could defeat old powers. The lessons of 1973 are still used in military planning today. The attack was codenamed Operation Badr. Thousands of Egyptian soldiers crossed the wide Suez Canal in small boats. They used powerful water cannons to blast through the huge sand walls of the Bar-Lev line. In the north, hundreds of Syrian tanks rolled into the Golan Heights. They quickly overran the first line of Israeli defenses. The defenders were outnumbered, sometimes 10 to 1. Israel's main defense plan relied on its powerful air force. The Israeli Air Force was considered one of the best in the world. It was filled with skilled pilots flying American-made Phantom and Skyhawk jets. But when the jets scrambled, they met a new, deadly surprise. The sky was filled with Soviet-made surface-to-air missiles, or SAMS. Egypt and Syria had built one of the most complex air defense systems ever seen. They had high-altitude SAMS. They had low-altitude SAMS. And they had the new mobile SA-6 missile. This system could move with the army. The Israeli pilots had never faced anything like it. Their planes were being shot down at an alarming rate. In the first 3 days, the Israeli Air Force lost dozens of jets. The game had truly changed. Without air cover, Israeli soldiers on the ground were in deep trouble. In the Golan Heights, a small number of Israeli tanks fought a desperate battle. This was later called the Valley of Tears. A single Israeli tank brigade, led by Avigdor Ben-Gal, reportedly faced a force of hundreds of Syrian tanks. They fought for 3 days, stopping the Syrian advance just before it broke through. The war was now a crisis for the whole world. The Soviet Union began a huge airlift, resupplying Egypt and Syria with new missiles and tanks. In response, the United States launched Operation Nickel Grass. President Nixon ordered a massive airlift of supplies to Israel. This included new tanks, new jets, and, most importantly, new technology to fight the SAM missiles. With new supplies, the tide began to turn. Israeli forces stabilized the front in the Golan Heights. They began to push the Syrian army back. On the southern front, the war saw its largest tank versus tank battle since World War II. On October 14th, Egypt moved its tanks out from under the SAM missile umbrella. Israel's tanks and air force met them. Egypt reportedly lost over 250 tanks in a single day. Then, Israeli General Ariel Sharon led a daring counterattack. On the night of October 15th, his forces found a gap between the Egyptian armies. They crossed the Suez Canal into Egypt. This move was a huge gamble, but it worked. Soon, Israeli forces were on the west side of the canal. They moved south, cutting off the entire Egyptian Third Army. The war was now at a breaking point. The Soviet Union allegedly threatened to intervene directly. The United States responded by raising its defense condition to DEFCON 3. This was the highest state of alert since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Faced with a global crisis, the superpowers forced a ceasefire. On October 25, 1973, after 19 days of brutal fighting, the guns fell silent. The element of surprise was a key factor. Declassified intelligence reports showed that both American and Israeli agencies had received warnings. However, an idea called the concept dominated Israeli thinking. The concept was the belief that Egypt would not attack until it had stronger air power. This belief was proven wrong. The effectiveness of the SA-6 missile is well documented. Unlike older SAMS, the SA-6 was mobile and used a new type of radar. This made it very hard for Israeli pilots to jam or avoid. It forced the Israeli Air Force to change its tactics completely. The scale of the ground war is confirmed by records from all sides. Initial reports showed Syria attacked the Golan with over 1,200 tanks. Israel defended with fewer than 180. The total number of tanks lost by all sides in 19 days is estimated to be over 2,500. This is more than many tank fleets in the entire world today. The superpower involvement is also verified. Operation Nickel Brass delivered over 22,000 tons of equipment to Israel. The Soviet airlift delivered over 15,000 tons to Egypt and Syria. The war became a high-stakes test of American versus Soviet weapons. One of the biggest areas of debate is, who won the war? The answer depends on how you define victory. Militarily, many historians agree that Israel achieved a battlefield victory. At the ceasefire, Israeli troops were 101 kilometers from Cairo, Egypt's capital. They were also 40 kilometers from Damascus, Syria's capital. However, politically and psychologically, many argue that Egypt and Syria won. They had shattered the myth of Israeli invincibility. They proved that Arab armies could plan and execute a complex modern attack. Another conflict gap is the intelligence failure. Why was Israel caught by surprise? The Agranat Commission, Israel's official investigation, blamed overconfidence. It found that intelligence officers had information, but they failed to put the puzzle together. A more controversial theory involves a man named Ashraf Marwan. He was a high-level Egyptian official who was also a spy for Israel. It is alleged he gave Israel a warning, but it came too late, just hours before the attack. The full truth of his role is still debated. The human cost of those 19 days was immense. Thousands of Egyptian, Syrian, and Israeli soldiers lost their lives. Thousands more were wounded or became prisoners of war. Each number represents a person, a family, and a future loss. The war's impact on civilians was profound. In Israel, the surprise and the high losses created a national trauma. The feeling of total security was gone. This led to a public outcry and eventually the resignation of Prime Minister Golda Meir. In Egypt, the war restored a sense of national pride. The successful crossing of the Suez Canal was seen as a great victory. This new confidence was a key reason why Egypt's leader, Anwar Sadat, felt strong enough to seek peace with Israel years later. For the whole world, the war had a direct impact. The Arab oil-producing nations declared an oil embargo against countries supporting Israel. This caused the 1973 oil crisis, leading to high prices and economic problems worldwide. This war was a turning point. It proved that in modern war, technology matters more than ever. Before 1973, the tank and the fighter jet were kings of the battlefield. After 1973, this changed. The war showed that a small, relatively cheap missile could destroy a multi-million-dollar tank or jet. It was like a magic stone that could slay a giant. This changed everything. Military thinkers realized they had a new problem. How do you protect your expensive tanks and jets? The answer led to the next 50 years of military technology. The SAM missiles in 1973 were the direct motivation for America to build the Invincible F-117 stealth fighter. Navies built new systems to shoot down missiles. Armies built new armor for tanks. The Yom Kippur War was the blueprint for the 21st century battlefield. It was a war of electronics, of missiles, and of high-speed, high-stakes decisions. We know that a surprise attack by Egypt and Syria in 1973 nearly defeated Israel. We know that new Soviet SAM missiles changed the rules of air warfare overnight. And we know this led to the largest tank battles since World War II. We also know that this war forced the superpowers to the brink of nuclear conflict. The war ended in a fragile truce, but the questions it raised would echo for decades. The shock of the war had a powerful, long-term effect. It showed all sides that another full-scale war was unwinnable. It made leaders realize that peace was a better option. Just 5 years later, in 1978, Egypt and Israel signed the Camp David Accords. This was the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab nation, and it holds to this day. The war's lessons were learned by every military on Earth. The new reality was, missiles are cheap and jets are expensive. The next 50 years became a race to build better missiles and to build better defenses against them. This technological race continues at high speed. The war showed that a smaller, less equipped force could challenge a superpower if it had the right technology. This idea would define future conflicts. It showed that surprise, good planning, and new game-changing weapons could level the playing field. This lesson is still studied by nations and non-state groups around the world. The 1973 1973 Yom Kippur War was a brutal, sudden conflict. It left deep scars on the nations that fought it. It proved that technology could change a war overnight, but it also showed that this change always comes at a profound human cost. The SAM missiles of 1973 created a problem that demanded a radical new solution. To learn how the United States secretly built a plane to be invisible to radar, watch our next documentary, The Invisible Jet: How Skunk Works built the F-117 Nighthawk. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary valuable, please subscribe for more in-depth stories that shape our world.